From KCBS Radio in San Francisco, I'm Matt Pittman, and this is Bay Current for Wednesday, January 26th. Omicron was the latest variant of the coronavirus to prolong the COVID pandemic, and it introduced new elements into the fray, namely its super contagious nature. And now, researchers are racing to produce a vaccine booster specific to the Omicron variant. Would we need a fourth booster shot, and only for this variant? And would it protect against future variants? That was the topic and just a few of the questions on KCBS Radio's Ask an Expert segment with Dr. Nevan Krogan, director of the Quantitative Biosciences Institute at UCSF here in the Bay Area. My KCBS Radio colleagues Matt Bigler and Holly Kwan take it from here.
Let's start off with Pfizer. So they're launching those clinical trials, and I vaguely remember that they had previously said that they wanted to shoot for March to have an Omicron-specific vaccine in place. So this follows along that these trials are going to be leading up to hopefully something they have ready in March?
Yeah, it looks like it, and what they can do quite easily is tailor their vaccines to different variants. So they've designed the RNA to be compatible with the spike protein. So we'd be generating antibodies against the spike protein of Omicron. I guess for me, the question is, once this is available to the great masses, is it going to be required, or there's going to be something else that we need to deal with?
And it's not just Omicron, right? It's also the other variants that are out there that are being targeted by this new vaccine. Is that correct?
Well, I think all these vaccines are going to be targeting all the variants, which is great. The question is, do we need this higher level of specificity with these vaccines to be effective? But it's been proven that, the original vaccine, when you get your booster shot, you get great immunity against Omicron, Delta, and any other variant for that matter.
So ideally, are you saying that ideally maybe we should be looking for a vaccine that, end all be all, like it covers everybody, not necessarily having to be tailored every time a new variant shows up?
Yeah, that would be very advantageous for not just for, say, SARS-CoV-2, but other coronaviruses that could rear its head. And to be able to do that, we just need to study this virus in more detail. We need to get a better understanding of how it infects our cells and ultimately how we can prevent it through vaccines, and then also combat it through drugs and therapies.
This is starting to sound like the flu shot, right? Because every year, epidemiologists monitor for the different influenza vaccines that are out there. A vaccine is tailored, and then it's administered. Do you see that as maybe the future of an endemic virus instead of a pandemic?
I think absolutely. This is what we're going to be dealing with. When we get our flu shot, I assume we're also going to be getting our coronavirus shot as well. And with the flu shots, scientists do their best job to try to predict, which strain is going to be most prevalent and therefore which vaccine would be most effective. And I think the same thing's going to be happening here with SARS-CoV-2 and the coronavirus. But in order to make these predictions more accurately, we really need to understand in a much deeper way how this virus is causing such havoc in our cells. So there's so much more work we need to do in order to understand that.
Well, let's talk about your work. Your research looks at the mapping of COVID mutations in order to understand them. So why do we want to be studying variants that maybe have been variants of the past if they're not making up most of the cases that we're seeing now?
Well, most of the research, the vast majority of research, is focused on the spike protein in these variants. And I think, that's good because the spike protein allows the virus to get into our cells. But what about after the virus is in our cells? Can't there be mutations in some of the other genes? That's one out of, say, approximately 30 genes that the virus has. What about mutations in other genes? And we've really been focusing on a different part of the virus. And we've shown that certain mutations are actually suppressing the immune response after the virus gets into our cells. And that's important because then it allows the virus to replicate more, and ultimately this is how you can get increased transmissibility. And we initially focused on the alpha variant because at the time it was the most prevalent, but there's mutations in the alpha variant that are now popping up in Delta and Omicron. So I think it's really important for us to study all the mutations, all the variants, because the next variant is going to be a mixture of the mutations that exist in the previous variants.
I'm going to ask a question from a listener. Thank you for sending it in that I think fits here. If you had COVID and didn't know it, would a test show that you had it?
that you've had. I mean, if they're antibody tests, if you were so inclined to carry out such tests, yes. But of course, immunity wanes after a certain amount of time. So you could, although this isn't routinely done, you could go and look at antibodies to see if you have had the infection.
I was just looking at a story that I saw that came out with two cases in Washington State that may have some sort of variant from Omicron. It raised my eyebrows because I thought, okay, here we go again. Here's yet another mutation or a variant.
Well, I mean, we just need to be careful. I mean, the virus mutates, and the vast majority of mutations are not going to result in something that's more problematic than the initial strain. And large parts of the world are carrying out a lot of sequencing, so we're being able to monitor in a way that's never been done before mutation of this virus. But we've got to be careful and not get too wound up when we start to see some mutations, and let the researchers do their work and going forward. So you're going to see the virus mutate. You just got to be careful in terms of the implications you draw from those mutations.
What is hybrid immunity? I've heard this term, and how does that work? I mean, are we getting closer to that? Is it something we want to get to?
Well, it's definitely been shown that if you're vaccinated and then you get a breakthrough infection, you're getting a much higher level of immunity. And I think the converse is true as well if you were infected and then you got the vaccine. So the data is definitely showing that you're getting this extra level of protection, especially when you get vaccinated and get a breakthrough infection. So this hybrid immunity, I think is real, and it is providing people with a great deal of protection. But, it's even more reason to get vaccinated. There's still an uncomfortable amount of people not vaccinated in this country, in my opinion. So we have the tools to combat this. So the message is get vaccinated if you're not vaccinated, and get a booster ASAP if you haven't got that yet.
Yeah, I wonder who hasn't gotten that message yet. And then when we hear about things like hybrid immunity, I wonder whether it gives the wrong message, because people say, okay, well, even though I'm vaccinated and I'm boosted, maybe I'm going to go ahead and go to this concert or sporting event or party, because if I happen to get it, I won't die, and then I'm going to have a higher amount of immunity.
Well, that's one way of thinking of it. I think a better, less selfish way of thinking about it is that you could be spreading the virus, okay? And you could be spreading the virus to somebody who just can't medically get vaccinated, or won't be as healthy as you. That's number one. Number two, people need to think about long COVID too. This is going to be a phenomenon that we're going to be dealing with for many, many years. And we're seeing people with long COVID, even if you've been vaccinated, and get infected and seemingly recover very quickly. The third point I'd make is that, the more the virus spreads, the more a chance you give it to mutate. And then the more chance the virus has to overcome some of our defense strategies that we have in place, like the vaccination. So it could come back to get you at the end of the day. So I think we still have to be steadfast. This has been going on for a couple of years. But I still think we need to be taking these not so intrusive precautions when we're going about our daily business.
So the Omicron surge seems to be over the peak. The data shows that the testing, the positive tests are declining. I'd like to ask you about how you feel about where we are and where do you think we'll be in the next couple of weeks? Well,
the Omicron, it is declining, although what trails after the peak of infection or the peak of hospitalization and deaths. And as of the last couple of days, we're almost at the same death rate in this country as we were at the Delta peak back last summer. But hopefully that decreases in the very near future. I'm hopeful that in a couple months things will be closer back to normal with the immunity, with the hybrid immunity that we're seeing with the mass infections, and combined with the vaccinations that are quite prevalent in many parts of the world. So, knock on wood, you never know what this virus is going to do. Every time you think you predict what this virus is going to do, it surprises us. But the hope is, in the next few months in the summer, we're back to normal. And I'm hoping we're not dealing with another variant that has been as problematic as transmissible as Omicron or as deadly as Delta.
Thank you again to Dr. Nevan Krogan, the director of the Quantitative Biosciences Institute at UCSF here in San Francisco. And thanks as well to my KCBS radio colleagues, Matt Bigler and Holly Kwan. And thank you for listening. New episodes of Bay Current are out every day, and we'd love to be part of your daily routine. You can subscribe on the Odyssey app, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and just about anywhere you listen to podcasts. And every episode of Bay Current is on the KCBS Radio YouTube page, and there is a link to that in our show notes. That's it for today's Bay Current. I'm Matt Pittman. We'll chat with you again tomorrow.